Ever feel like you're just swimming uphill in a waterfall of information when you're trying to get your head around something new, especially in science, tech, engineering, math?
Oh, definitely.
You're looking at all sorts of visuals, diagrams, charts, maybe some really complicated formulas, and instead of clarity, you just feel, well, swamped.
Yeah, overwhelmed.
If that sounds familiar, then yeah, you're in the right place.
Today, we're diving deep into some pretty fascinating research. It explores exactly how those visuals, what the experts call external representations, actually affect how well we learn in those crucial STEM fields.
That's a great way to put it. We're looking at a really comprehensive study. It's called The More the Better.
Mm.
And it's not just one experiment, it's a systematic review. Researchers looked back at a whole bunch of studies, dozens of them, all centered on this idea of using multiple external representations, or MERS.
MERS, right, in STEM learning. And the big question they were wrestling with is one I bet has crossed your mind. When you're trying to understand something complex, does having, say, more than two visuals automatically make it easier
Yeah.
or help you learn better?
It's such a natural question, isn't it?
Yeah.
You might instinctively think, yeah, more information, more ways to see it, that's got to be good.
Right.
But we all know that sometimes too much of a good thing can actually be, well, just too much. And that's why this research is so insightful for you listening. Whether you're tackling a challenging project at work with tons of data, or maybe finally trying to nail down a tricky scientific concept,
Or just curious.
or just curious, exactly. Understanding how different visuals impact your learning is kind of like having a secret key. It can help you cut through the noise,
Right.
really grasp what matters, and sidestep that feeling of being completely overwhelmed.
Absolutely. We're going to unpack what the science truly reveals about finding that sweet spot, that sort of ideal mix of visual information that helps rather than hinders your understanding. And our roadmap for this deep dive is this extensive review and meta-analysis. It was published in the Educational Psychology Review just last October. And this wasn't a quick glance. They thoroughly examined, I think, 46 different studies and crunched the numbers from a massive 132 different findings.
Wow, 132.
Yeah. So we're not just talking theories here. We're looking at what the data actually suggests.
Okay, so let's get specific then. What exactly are these multiple external representations, MERS? It sounds a little academic.
It might sound technical, but the concept is pretty straightforward, really. MERS are simply any combination of different visual ways of presenting information. The key is that these visuals offer distinct ways of encoding the information. Yeah, like how the information is represented. The researchers in this study categorized them into two main types: symbolic and graphical. Symbolic representations include things like text, written explanations, mathematical formulas. Graphical representations are your pictures, diagrams, charts, graphs. So when we talk about MERS, we mean using different kinds of these visuals together to explain something or work through a problem.
Right, I get it. So if you're trying to understand, say, how a rocket engine works,
Mm.
using MERS might involve the text explaining combustion,
Yep.
a detailed diagram showing the engine parts,
Mm-mm.
and maybe even a graph illustrating the thrust over time. That kind of combination.
Exactly that. Or think about learning the human circulatory system. You might have text describing blood flow, a diagram of the heart and vessels, and maybe even an animation showing the blood moving.
Right, the animation helps too.
Or, in a math problem, geometry maybe,
Yeah.
you'd have the written problem, the equations, and a drawing of the shape. These are all real-world examples of MERS in STEM learning.
Now, the study points out something interesting. In a lot of past research, really focused on what happens when you combine just two representations, like text and an image. But this study is looking at something different, isn't it? It's asking what happens when you use more than two. Why is that jump so important?
That's a really critical distinction. For a long time, yeah, the research focus was heavy on that classic pair, often text plus a visual. And we learned a lot about how those combos can be more effective than just text alone. That's often called the multimedia effect.
Multimedia effect, okay.
But if you think about it, many complex STEM topics, and really many complex subjects generally, often require us to process info presented in more than just two ways. Consider like a scientific research paper.
Oh, yeah.
You'll often see text, data tables, multiple graphs, diagrams. all working together to convey the findings.
You're right. It's rare to see a really complex idea explained with just like one picture and a short paragraph.
Precisely. So this study specifically set out to address that gap in our knowledge. What happens when we go beyond that duo? When we start integrating 3, 4, or even more representations, are the benefits we see with 2 just amplified?
Or do they level off?
Exactly. Do they stay the same? Or do we hit a point where adding more visuals actually becomes less helpful or even starts to hinder understanding? That's the sort of uncharted territory this research explores.
Okay, so the big reveal. What did they discover when they looked at all those studies? What are the main takeaways about using more than 2 versus fewer?
Well, the meta-analysis revealed some really interesting patterns. Overall, it suggests that learning with more than 2 representations in STEM can actually lead to better outcomes compared to using just 2.
Can.
Yes, it can. They looked at a few key measures. First, they found evidence suggesting a reduction in what psychologists call cognitive load.
Cognitive load, that's like mental effort, right?
Exactly. It's basically how much mental effort you feel you're putting in. The research indicated that having more than 2 visuals might actually make the learning process feel less mentally demanding for you.
That's fascinating because intuitively you'd think more visuals means more for your brain to process, more effort.
That's the common assumption, right? But this study hints that when information is spread across multiple representations, it might actually make it easier for your brain to digest. Second, they found an improvement in performance.
Performance meaning.
Better understanding, better problem solving. It suggests using more than 2 reps can lead to a better overall grasp of the material.
Okay.
And perhaps surprisingly, they didn't find any significant difference in the time it took to learn.
Really?
Yeah, so you're not necessarily spending more time to potentially get these benefits.
That's a really compelling set of findings then. Less mental strain, potentially better understanding, and not necessarily more time invested.
Wow. It is. They also compared using more than 2 representations to using just a single one. And again, they found advantages for the higher number in terms of performance.
Okay.
So it seems that moving beyond even one visual aid can be beneficial for your learning. However, and this is a really important however, the researchers emphasize that this positive effect isn't, guaranteed. It really depends on several other factors.
There's always a catch, isn't there? So what are these factors? What makes the difference between helpful and just more stuff?
Well, one of the most critical factors they identified is the presence of what they call appropriate support.
Appropriate support.
Yeah. The study found that whether you actually benefit from having more than 2 representations largely depends on whether the learning materials include elements that help you see how those different visuals connect and how they relate to the core information.
Okay, so just throwing a bunch of diagrams and charts together and hoping for the best?
Yeah.
That's not the answer.
Definitely not.
There needs to be some kind of guidance to help you, the learner, make sense of how it all fits together.
Exactly. The study highlighted a few examples of this appropriate support. One was signaling, which basically means highlighting the same information across different visuals.
Signaling.
Like color coding. Yeah, exactly. Like if you have a diagram and a graph with related data, maybe they use the same color or labels to clearly show you where that info overlaps. Makes it easier to track.
Gotcha.
Another example is encouraging you to actively explain the visuals yourself. They call these self-explanation prompts.
Making you think it through.
Right. It forces you to think more deeply about the visuals and how they connect to the concepts. And a third example they mentioned was creating dynamic links between representations, maybe through interactive tools where, clicking on one visual changes another.
Oh, neat. Like interactive simulation.
Could be. Things like that.
That makes a lot of sense. Without that kind of support, I can totally see how just having more visuals could actually be more confusing.
Yeah,
It could lead right back to that feeling of being overwhelmed we started with.
absolutely.
If your brain doesn't know how to connect the dots, it just feels like a jumble.
Precisely. The study strongly suggests that without that kind of guidance, that support built in, simply adding more visuals might not help you at all. It could even backfire, potentially overloading your mental processing capacity instead of reducing it.
Okay. Now, the meta-analysis focused mainly on the number of representations. But you said the review also looked at studies that kept the number the same, but changed the types of visuals. Any interesting insights there?
Yes, there were some really fascinating qualitative findings there. One trend that emerged was that often abstract graphical representations seem to be more effective than more concrete or, say, photorealistic ones.
Abstract, more effective. Okay.
especially when it came to tasks that required you to apply what you learned to new situations, transfer tasks, and for really understanding the underlying concepts.
Abstract versus concrete. Can you give me an example? Like, what does that mean in a STEM context?
Sure. Let's go back to our electrical circuits example. A concrete visual might be a photorealistic image of a circuit board, with all the actual components laid out as they look in real life.
Okay, like a picture.
Right. An abstract graphical representation, on the other hand, would be a schematic diagram. It uses standard symbols, those squiggly lines for resistors, circles with lines for capacitors connected by simple lines for wires.
Okay, the standard circuit diagram. I see the difference. So why might those more abstract schematics be, well, better for my understanding sometimes?
The researchers proposed a couple of key reasons. One is something called the seductive details effect.
Seductive details.
Sounds intriguing. It does, doesn't it? The idea is that concrete visuals, because they try to look realistic, can sometimes contain a lot of extra visual information that isn't actually relevant to the core concept you're trying to learn.
Like the color of the wires or the brand name on a chip.
Exactly. All those little details in the picture of the circuit board might distract you from understanding the fundamental flow of electricity or the function of the components. Abstract visuals, by their nature, strip away those non-essential details.
Right.
They force you to focus on the essential structure and relationships. This might help you concentrate on the underlying principles.
That makes sense. It's like removing the visual clutter so you can see the important stuff more clearly.
Exactly. And the other idea is that abstract visuals might actually help you build more flexible, more generalizable knowledge.
How so?
By focusing on that core structure and the relationships, you might be better able to apply that understanding to different situations or problems. Problems that might look different on the surface but operate on the same fundamental principles.
Oh, okay.
So that abstract schematic of a circuit might be more helpful for understanding the general rules of how circuits work, which you can then apply to any circuit, not just the one in the picture.
That's a really interesting point. Almost counterintuitive. Because you might think seeing the real thing makes it easier. But it sounds like sometimes those abstract representations lead to deeper, more transferable learning for you.
That does seem to be the case, particularly for those deeper comprehension and transfer tasks, yeah.
Now, there's another concept mentioned, the redundancy principle. Usually we hear that presenting the same info in multiple formats, like reading text aloud while also showing it on screen, can actually hurt learning.
Yes, the classic redundancy principle.
But this study seems to suggest that with more than two representations, maybe some overlap isn't so bad. How does that work?
That's a really nuanced observation, and the study touches on it carefully. The classic principle often warns against, say, identical spoken and written text alongside an image because it can overload your verbal processing.
Right.
However, this study hints that when you're dealing with more than two representations, having some level of overlap, or what they call partial redundancy, might actually be beneficial for your learning.
Partial redundancy.
Yeah.
So not exactly the same info.
Not necessarily verbatim, no. The key idea here is that the different visuals, even if they show some of the same core information, might be offering complementary ways for you to understand it.
Complementary, like different angles on the same thing.
Exactly. They could be highlighting different aspects or presenting the information from slightly different visual perspectives. This could give you multiple entry points to the material. It allows you to kind of connect with the representation that clicks best for you personally.
Ah, okay. So it's not just repeating the same thing over and over.
No.
It's more like providing slightly different explanations or views that all reinforce the same core idea. That makes more sense for me. It could give you flexibility.
Precisely. It provides flexibility and might cater to different learning preferences without necessarily causing the same kind of overload that strict, identical redundancy might.
Another factor they looked at was the educational level of the learners. Do they find differences between, say, high school students and university students?
They did. The meta-analysis indicated that post-secondary students' university levels seem to benefit more in terms of performance when learning with more than two representations compared to secondary school students.
Why might that be? Are university students just, I don't know, better equipped to handle more information?
That's a likely factor, yeah. As you progress through education, you generally develop more sophisticated information processing skills. You also tend to become more familiar with a wider variety of representations common in your field.
Like knowing how to read complex graphs or diagrams specific to your major?
Exactly. So You might just be better prepared to handle and integrate that larger amount of visual information effectively. However, the study also acknowledges a limitation. They didn't directly measure how new or unfamiliar the representations themselves were to the students.
Ah, so maybe the university students were just more familiar with the specific visuals used in those particular studies.
It's possible that familiarity likely plays a significant role in how effective those visuals are for your learning. If you've seen similar diagrams before, you can probably make sense of them more easily.
That makes sense. Familiarity helps. Okay, and finally, the review briefly touched on problem solving. Did they find anything different there compared to just learning concepts?
Yeah, there were a smaller number of studies included that specifically looked at problem solving, mostly in mathematics.
Okay.
And those studies generally suggested that a combination of text, graphical, and formula-based representations could be particularly helpful for solving problems, compared to using only one or two of those types.
So having all three words, pictures, and equations seemed useful for tackling math problems.
It seemed advantageous, yes. Having those different ways to frame the problem and think about potential solutions appeared beneficial for you. However, the researchers were careful to point out that this is an area where more research is definitely needed to draw stronger conclusions.
So, promising, but still needs more digging.
Precisely.
Okay, let's try and bring this all together for you, our listener. After this deep dive into the more the better, what are the key things you should keep in mind when you're facing a new STEM topic?
Okay, so the main message, I think, is that using more than two visuals in STEM learning can be a real asset for you. It has the potential to actually make the learning feel less mentally taxing.
Yeah, reduce that cognitive load.
Right, and lead to a better overall understanding, better performance.
But it's not a guaranteed win. Just, you know, bombarding yourself or someone else with more pictures isn't necessarily going to make a complex topic suddenly click.
Exactly. The way those visuals are designed is crucial. And maybe most importantly, the support that's there to help you connect them. That's absolutely critical.
Without that support,
Mm-hmm.
the signaling, the prompts, the links, more visuals could just lead to more confusion for you.
Yeah.
Backfire, even.
Yep. Could overload you.
And another interesting point, don't automatically shy away from those more abstract diagrams and schematics. They might look simpler, but they could actually be more effective for helping you grasp the core underlying principles than you might initially think.
That's right. Sometimes, for you, less visual noise, less seductive detail can lead to a clearer understanding of the fundamental concepts, more transferable knowledge.
Okay.
And finally, remember that the ideal number and type of visuals probably depends on your specific learning goals and what you already know coming in. There's likely no single magic number or perfect combination that works for everyone all the time.
It's context dependent.
Very much so.
So for you listening, maybe think about the last time you were trying to wrap your head around a complex STEM topic. Were you presented with multiple visuals? Were they actually helpful? Did they feel connected? Now, thinking about what we've unpacked today, how might you approach learning like that differently in the future? Or maybe what questions might you ask about the way information is presented to you? Like, is there support here to help me connect these pieces?
That's a great reflective question. And really, this deep dive just scratches the surface of a super interesting area of research. It's directly relevant to how you learn every day. If you're eager to explore more about how we process visual info, how to optimize your own learning,
Yeah.
I'd really encourage you to maybe delve into the broader research on multimedia learning, cognitive load theory, and the specific roles different types of representations play in STEM. And of course, the study we discussed today, The More the Better, is a fantastic starting point for your own further investigation.